we're being tested. How are we reacting to seeing our brothers and sisters being slaughtered every day, and to not even be able to get in a bottle of water without the permission of the occupier? Like, what is going on?
Why is the region so divided? Why do we have all these lines and all these little countries? Like, why? When did that? Didn't look like that 100 years ago. Who did that?
They would literally draw these lines on the map and separate the Muslims.
The rulers do not represent the people. The Muslim rulers do not represent the Muslim people, like in the Muslim world. I mean, we have seen protest after protest erupt.
Do you seriously think there's no solution in Islam for a literal genocide? Like, do you seriously think that Allah has not set any kind of way to deal with what is happening right now?
So you're telling me you're going to take something from the people of Gaza throughout all of this. They've inspired you, but you're not going to give anything back to them.
Whether or not we feel it or we realise it, we do want to be connected. We are connected.
We are. As the Prophet ﷺ said, we are one body.
The Muslims in Gaza are praying for a solution. What if we are supposed to be that answered dua?
And I think it really shows how powerful the Quran is, and how if we as Muslims in the West are able to hold on to that the way in which they hold on to it, we can also achieve so much.
It's been 1 year, or we're in currently November 2024, so it's been a year and a month since this particular phase in the wider struggle for Palestine has been going on. So the genocide in Gaza. I don't think any of us, or even a lot of political analysts that I've listened to, I don't think a lot of people thought that it would carry on this long, but it has. So I think that's an important point to reflect on, in that why do we think it's been able to go on for this long, or why did we think it wouldn't go on this long, and why has it?
I feel like one thing which is quite sad to see is we see the truth and the reality about what is happening to these people. Obviously we feel sad, we feel angry, but the actual leaders who are perpetuating this are also seeing it, but they're choosing to kind of remain apathetic, and they're not doing anything. So it kind of just shows that we care more about our brothers and sisters and our fellow Muslims and people suffering, but the people up high actually don't really care at all. That's kind of what I'm seeing.
Yeah, there's definitely a disparity between the people and the elite, the people in power, and those of influence. Definitely a disparity, and it's shown more than ever the human side of it, in the sense that Palestine has really become such a mainstream issue, and the momentum's actually continued throughout the year. And you know how previously, like I think in 2019 when they were storming Al-Aqsa during Ramadan, that was one of those times where everyone was talking about Palestine, then it kind of died down and everyone kind of moved on. Whereas in this case, I don't think that's happened yet. Like I still think the momentum is still going, really.
And a lot of people kind of thought before it's just a Muslim issue. I think I know that it was Muslims who cared about what was going on, but right now you're obviously seeing lots of non-Muslims who are seeing the reality of what's going on, and they've gotten quite passionate, which is quite nice and admirable to see. You kind of feel like there is a bit of hope in the world because people are still good. There is something good about them, and
I think the worst thing that's come out of the fact that it's gone on for a year is just seeing how, like you said, the people in power actually do not care about human suffering, and if it's in their interest, they will allow it to go on for however long, even if it's so public, even if it's in everyone's face and everyone can see the truth, they'll still allow it to go on just because it's in their interest too. And I think that's quite a scary, like it's genuinely a scary thought when you see the images coming out of Gaza that we've seen for a year. It's on the news, everyone knows it's happening, and yet no one with power is willing to do anything about it. And to think that we all, wherever we are in the world, we live under these people. They are the ones that control everything about the way we live, whether we like it or not. And they don't care. They're willing to see, and they're willing for us to see. That's the scary part. Before, it was like hidden. And it would be like something would come out every few years. Like recently, images of a war crime that the Americans committed in Iraq. The image of that came out, and it was a big deal. And back then, like, it would be a leak, you know, like a war crime would be a leak. Now it's every day, and they don't care that we're seeing. Why do they not care? And I think that's probably, like, I don't know, for me it's the scariest thing that's come out of this last year. They don't even care that we know anymore.
it just shows, and I think for a lot of people it's been a shocking realization as to how powerless we are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think especially for a lot of people here in the West, where they really believe in democracy, they believe in them having their rights and being able to voice their opinions, and that should be heard by the people in power. So then seeing that them alongside everyone else has been raising our voices around this issue for an entire year, and the fact that actually hasn't created any change has been a really shocking realization, I think, for a lot of people. And even for me, like, I mean, obviously I didn't, in a way, I don't expect much of the current status quo, but just to actually see this unfolding in real time on social media and on our screens, and then to actually see that nothing's happening is still such an unbelievable thing to think about. Like, it's just still really shocking and unbelievable.
Yeah. One thing as well is seeing like censorship right in front of your eyes. So one thing as well which I keep seeing is articles and like headlines which are worded really specifically to make it seem like obviously it's a conflict, like there's equal kind of power on each side, and there's a crime on each side, and they're kind of equal. But you're seeing headlines which are just so I don't know how to explain it, but they're not kind of showcasing the actual reality of what's going on.
I think even with like a lot of people have blamed pro-Palestinians voting third party or just not voting at all in the American election for Kamala Harris losing the election, but so many people are trying to hold pro-Palestinians accountable for losing the election. Why aren't you holding the woman who's supposed to be a Democrat, who's supposed to be a liberal, who ran her campaign, no matter how many times she was asked about Palestine, about Gaza, she never gave any kind of answer of substance. She's the one who lost her own campaign. She didn't run a campaign that was answering the questions of the American people. She lost her own campaign.
I think it just, it's completely highlighted the weaknesses in American democracy. The fact that the two candidates that they could pull forward were those two candidates to begin with is just embarrassing. This is supposed to be the leader of Western democracy, and this is what the rest of the world is supposed to look up to.
Literally.
And then to blame pro-Palestinian people for losing the election that you were going to lose anyway. They would have lost regardless of the third party votes. They would have lost regardless, because people see through whatever it is that they're trying to gather support on.
You're right, like people now are actually seeing what these people's aims are, and to be honest, for me, all it comes down to is money. What is going to get them the richest and make them the most powerful. So even I know a lot of people now have been looking into why the Western powers actually want Gaza and want to actually take it over, and it all comes down to trade routes. I think there's talk of like oil kind of reserves in that area.
No, that's a really good point, and how it's really illustrated how their motives are very much fueled by greed, money, oil, natural resources. And unfortunately, Palestine isn't the only example of this. Palestine has really shone a light on this in other areas of the world, including Sudan, including Congo, including areas in the Middle East, which they have also been bombing and perpetually creating conflict there for literally decades. And it's really sad, but unfortunately, Palestine is not the only example of this. And these Western nations, they're actually just after it. They're after the resources for themselves, for their own benefit and their own gain. And it's very much fueled by this idea in their belief system that they are in some way superior. They're in some way superior to the rest of the world. And because they are superior, they have a right over stealing and looting the resources there, and establishing their so-called democracies in those countries.
I think it just shows there's literally no difference between the right and the left when it comes to Western politics. They all have the same aim, they all have the same goal, but they just, I think it was,
leaders will change, but the policies actually just remain the same. I think people are actually realizing now the issues with democracy. Like it's advertised as if I can do what I want, I have a right to vote whoever I want, I have freedom of speech, I can protest if I want, if there's something that I don't like. But then in reality now we're seeing that you actually don't have as big of a say as you think you do. Like you said earlier about people will protest and they'll feel like their voice is heard and that's it, my job's done, and that's kind of the government's way of appeasing us and making us feel like we've done something for the people who are suffering, and that's it, full stop. But we really need to think about what more we can be doing, because that simply isn't enough, because these protests have been happening for a year now, and what progress have we actually made? I don't see any.
Yeah, I agree. I think what democracy does, or what living in the West does, is it gives you the illusion that you can make change. But when you actually want to make real change, there's so much pushback against it.
Yeah.
When you want systemic change, it just doesn't happen. Or anywhere in the world, wherever people have sought systemic change away from the Western image of that, or away from what the West sees as their interest, they push back against it. They'll organize a military coup, or they'll invade somewhere. So I just think the entire system is collapsing on itself. And I mean, I don't want to be too optimistic, but I do think that we are kind of in, I think they're on a downward spiral, and it now really is up to other people who believe in an alternative system, or who just want better for the world, to look at this situation and think, okay, now what are we going to do to take this situation and turn it into something positive, rather than we're seeing how badly this system is failing and we're just going to watch it fail, maybe hope from the sidelines that things get better. But how are we actually going to contribute, and how are we going to present something essentially better for the whole world, because the entire world is suffering under this system, and Gaza is like the worst example of that. And
And one thing is, we need to really think about who we're going to when we want and we're asking for change. Are we going to go to the governments who are actually perpetuating all of this, who are actually stopping our voices from being heard, and we're going to beg them to make a change? I don't think that's going to happen. We really need to think about where we can put our forces and our speech, and where we can direct it to ensure that something is actually going to happen. And I think what we've been doing, so protesting in our own countries, asking Keir Starmer to stop the genocide. It's just words. We know it's been like this for a year now. It's not really going to happen.
Why would he stop it when he's benefiting from it?
Exactly.
I do think, in a way, there has been a positive change in terms of people's understanding of the world, and this whole decolonize the narrative, which has really been going around. I've been really seeing people actively rethinking their understanding and their own worldview, and really understanding how much of that is shaped by the status quo and the disparity between what the status quo says versus the actual real facts. And it's been a really positive change to see in the past year, people really going back to the basics themselves and really trying to understand the history themselves and what really has been happening the past 76 years. Why is it that we're even in this situation today? And people really addressing these people attempting to answer these difficult questions for themselves, which I think is really, really positive, because that critical thinking is what is really going to help us to lead to the change which we want to see. To be able to question the current systems we're under, they're all really uncomfortable questions.
Yeah, definitely.
And they're uncomfortable because it requires action. And that's even more uncomfortable, because that means getting out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, no one wants to feel like they're not doing enough. No one wants to feel complicit. And it's really difficult when you look at a system like this, when you look at a situation like what's happening in Gaza, and then you look beyond what's actually just happening there, and you look at how everything's connected and the system that we live under. And actually we live in the country that created the state of Israel, so it's a big deal. No one wants to answer those questions, because then you have to look within yourself, and it's kind of scary to think about how I might be connected to essentially a genocide. And I feel like people are asking and answering those questions now, but it's taken a long time, because I feel like the majority of people don't want to look inward and don't want to look at, we live in this country and we have easy access to a lot of things, but where do they come from? How are we able to go to the supermarket and get what we need straight away? Where did this come from? How are the trade routes secured for these items?
I think we should also be clear on where we want this change to happen, because we've talked about America, we've talked about this country. Are we really going to focus our efforts here? They don't really have anything better to offer us, but we do have something better. Also, when we think about who we are accounting for what's happening in Gaza in terms of other countries, I've lost family in Gaza over the last year. I don't I do obviously hold them accountable.
Yep.
The UK, America, the UN, but who do I really blame for their deaths?
Who could have helped and could have intervened?
The Muslim armies, hundreds and hundreds of troops literally surrounding Gaza, just sitting there hoarding weapons. And for what? For what reason? You're just sitting there while the Ummah dies. Like, what is that?
Or even actually helping them, like opening trade to Israel and kind of keeping these connections and these ties. And again, it all just roots down to capitalism and their greed for this money. They see their brothers and sisters dying in Palestine, but again, they've kind of been convinced of the Western ideal of money and power is my absolute goal in life, and that's all I want to aspire to.
So we need to really look and try and understand, why is capitalism causing death and causing the interests of money and power and all these things causing death in this region, when we have something better. We have systems that should be put in place that aren't being put in place. Why is capitalism a problem for us? It shouldn't be a problem for us.
I think on that point of who you blame, and obviously we live in the West, so sometimes the West is at the forefront of our minds, but you're completely right, because whenever I see the people of Gaza and who they blame and who they call out to, I don't really hear them say, Britain, America, how could you do this to us? Because essentially Britain and America are just doing what they've always done. It's not surprising. They always say, the Arabs and the Muslims, we are going to account you, because you've completely abandoned and left us, and you've renounced any duty that you have to your own people, your own blood, these are your brothers and sisters, and you've just left them to be slaughtered. And every single time that they call out the Arabs and the Muslims.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think the past year has also really illustrated how the rulers do not represent the people. The Muslim rulers do not represent the Muslim people, like in the Muslim world. I mean, we have seen protest after protest erupt in all areas, like globally, even in areas which are literally themselves oppressed, like in Kashmir, they themselves are oppressed. In Yemen, they themselves are oppressed. But they are still coming out in huge numbers protesting for Palestine. And how, as an ummah, we are very much still, as an ummah, even though we are so divided in the sense that nobody is able to action what they want to do, nobody is able to actually free Palestine, but our sentiments, we're very much united by our sentiments, and how if it was up to the people, we would not still be seeing a genocide happening. We would not see them expanding into Lebanon. We would not see them completely emptying north of Gaza. We would not see any of this happening. And I think it's a really important point, because in a way it has been really, it's really positive to see that the Ummah sentiments are so strong in this regard, and how we are very much united for Palestine. But it's also about taking the next step, because our sentiments are not enough to free Palestine.
Yeah, I think people always say, Gaza exposed this, Gaza exposed that. I think the majority of Arabs and Muslims knew that their leaders were very much complicit when it came to oppression, and kind of always knew that they were puppets and they weren't very good at anything. But I think the last year has even shocked people that knew that, just how bad the situation is. It feels like this situation was in the making, and now this is the worst it's ever going to be, or it's the worst it's ever been, because it's like we've been sleepwalking into this crisis, because for however many decades these people have been ruling over us, and I guess we always knew it was bad, but did we know it was this bad to the point where they're literally allowing 2 million pretty much defenseless people who are besieged to be killed in the way that they're being killed, and to not even be able to get in a bottle of water without the permission of the occupier? Like, what is going on? Palestine is located in our region. It's located in the Middle East. It's surrounded by Arabs and Muslims. Why can you not get a bottle of water in without their permission, as in the occupier's permission? And I think this is it's shocked even the most skeptical people. I don't think any of us before ever thought the Muslim and Arab leaders were great, but even we're shocked at how bad they are, how treacherous they are. It's pure treachery. They've sold the blood of their brothers for what? For comfort. And how long is that comfort going to last? The West will abandon you one day. They always do.
Yeah.
And I think that's the worst part of it. They're not even going to stand by you. As soon as you don't benefit them anymore, they're done with you. It's happened countless times through our history.
Exactly. And I think it's also a really important point to think about how it never used to be like this. Like, this region didn't used to be divided by so much conflict. It didn't used to be the case where the Western powers completely controlled every single country in the Middle East and even in Africa, where they were able to just loot us without us even being able to do anything. They were able to get away with war crime after war crime after war crime. And it never used to be that way. And even the history of Asham, Muslims, Jews and Christians used to live peacefully together.
Like, we don't need to look at history with like rose-tinted glasses. Every region's always had its problems, but the point that you make about the West being in complete control of the East, it is true. It's not happened in history. Previously, when there were problems within the region, you could solve these problems amongst each other. The fact that you have complete foreigners essentially controlling everything that happened, to the point where like there are American military bases in everyone's country, so that they're all like protected from each other, but they're all threatening each other. But America's threatening everyone at the same time, and no one can do anything because they're all scared. And it's the amount that the region is like paralyzed to the point where no one can do anything. Like, you could have thousands of people protesting on the streets. Firstly, they're dictators anyway, so they don't care about people protesting on the streets. But even to like save their own image, like, you know, you might be a dictator, but you might still want people to like you. You might still want to have a good image. You might still want to be that person that did something so that you could go down in history as someone a bit great. But they don't even have that level of like of independence.
When Atakan called that rally and he was like,
yeah, so embarrassing.
In his own country, I'm going to protest against Palestine.
That's
You're literally the leader.
Like, and try and save face, but it made him look even more like
he
ridiculous.
literally had signed a deal the day before. And he was standing there with like a coffee and like crying Palestine.
Like, why
do something then.
Rally? You're the government. You don't hold a rally against. Who is the rally against? Like, we're laughing about it, but it's that bad. It's that serious. So I think the last year's exposed all of those kinds, because there's like two kinds of leaders in the Muslim world. You have the like straight up dictators that no one likes and everyone knows they're like a traitor. And then you have the, oh, but I support Palestine and I stand up for Muslims, but they're like hidden traitors. And I feel like Gaza shouldn't have had to expose all this. Gaza shouldn't have had to give so much and lose so much to expose all this. But I mean, I don't really, just in my own conversations with people online, I don't see many people defending even those leaders now, the ones that used to quote unquote pretend.
I think we should even talk about the fact that why is the region so divided? Why do we have all these lines and all these little countries? Like, why? When did that? Didn't look like that 100 years ago. Who did that?
Exactly.
And why would they even want to do that? Like, why would they want to divide the Muslims? What are they so scared of about the Muslims being together that they would literally draw these lines on the map and separate the Muslims and sow all this distrust and place all these corrupt leaders there,
and create Israel, like
exactly
place Israel in the middle of all of that.
And it's like they have carried out every aspect of that plan, even the plan of Greater Israel, which came to light, I think, more recently in an article.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just so crazy how they have actually followed every single step of that plan. That's what Netanyahu is still doing. He's still following that plan. That includes the invasion in Lebanon, and how
it's a very carefully thought out plan.
Yeah.
The steps have been there for years and years and years, like you said, and it's a bit scary that nothing has happened to stop it. Like they have tried and they have actually they have achieved what they wanted, and nothing has stopped them.
Because they created those borders and lines in Sykes-Picot 1916.
Exactly.
And then Balfour Declaration was the next year.
Exactly.
And now we're in 2024 and we still have those lines, still have those borders, and we have so many people who believe in them. These countries like Saudi Arabia, for example, UAE, these Gulf countries, even Jordan, they're very recent and very new countries. But the way in which people hold on to these nationalities, hold on to it as their identity, even Pakistan, Bangladesh, like these are all new. They're fairly recent, but it's like the way in which we've latched onto these identities as an ummah even though they've actually been artificially created by the West. It's actually a really nasty realization, because I think there's a lot of sincere people who don't even realize. And I think that's actually the crux of it, because there are so many sincere Muslims around the world who cry and bleed for Palestine. But it takes so much effort and critical thinking and so facing so many uncomfortable questions to really get to the bottom of the matter and to really face the truth of it. And I think that is the process that Gaza in the past year has really started. And it's been going on the past year, and I think it's still going on, that whole process of decolonizing our minds, decolonizing the narrative. And I don't like to use that word because I know it's used a lot, but that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, because even when you think about Sykes-Picot and you think about all the nation states that they created, the Europeans didn't even keep that system for themselves to prevent war between them, which kept happening over hundreds of years. They created the EU. So they don't even have the kind of arbitrary borders that the Muslim world has between them. They have free movement between it. Whereas Muslims have taken on those identities, which weren't even drawn by themselves. Like, it would be different if they drew them themselves at least, but like literally 2 European men drew them.
I was gonna say that as much as I do see that, like, this intense attachment to these borders and to these nationalities and to, you know, nationalism in the Muslim world so much, especially at uni, it, and also like the racism between like Arabs and Asians, oh my god, it's something else. But I think there's also something, I think Palestine has also kind of subconsciously pulled us together, whether or not we realize it.
It's united us.
Yeah, it's something that we don't really understand it, but it's all pulled us all together. Like, why else would we all care so much?
That's true.
All of us.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are non-Muslims that care, but the probability of finding a Muslim who doesn't care about Palestine is very, very, very small compared to a non-Muslim who does care about Palestine. So it's whether or not we feel it or we realize it, we do want to be connected. We are connected.
Yeah.
We are.
So recently, there's been a huge amount of protests in Turkey, for example, where people are literally jumping on ships that they suspect are sending weapons to the occupiers because they don't want to be complicit anymore. I think that's a big thing that's happened in the last year, is that people are refusing to be complicit because they know that their taxes and their government are involved in these atrocities and in these war crimes.
We are united despite our divisions and despite our borders and despite the rulers who act on the behalf of the Muslims and trade with Israel and attempt normalization. As an ummah globally, we are united in our sentiments for Palestine. And I think also Palestine has illustrated all the other issues and oppressions that our ummah is facing on a global level, like Congo, Sudan, in Kashmir, in Yemen, all over the Middle East and Africa. Like, there's even the Uyghur Muslims in China, the Rohingya Muslims. Like, we are facing oppression in so many different areas and regions, and it's really shown that as an ummah we feel connected to somebody who I technically don't even know, but because they are my brother and sister in Islam, I feel connected to them. And if I see them cry, or if I see them be killed, if I see an injustice against them, it's an injustice against me, and it's an injustice against our entire ummah. Because as the Prophet ﷺ said, we are one body. We are one body, and if one limb is struck off or hurt, the entire body reacts with restlessness and fever, and that's exactly what it's been.
I think one thing that's not necessarily been completely exposed, because it was already a reality before October 2023, was the hypocrisy of the West. And I feel like the only thing that maybe have changed in the last year is that there's a more clear understanding of why the West is so hypocritical. And it's because their own nation states that they have were built on genocide. A lot of them were built on genocide. The United States was built on genocide. Australia was built on genocide. So it's not surprising that a genocide of an indigenous people isn't something that they're willing to stop. And this branches out into all aspects of their system and the institutions that their system promotes. So the West has created these institutions like the ICJ and the ICC, which we haven't spoken about yet. But I feel like there was a lot of talk about these two institutions specifically in regards to the genocide in Gaza, because a lot of people had a lot of hope that these institutions would be able to bring about an end to the genocide. And I don't blame those people for having those hope, because people want to have hope. People want to believe that these institutions that were supposedly created to stop genocide specifically and to stop war crimes, people want to believe that they can do that. And I don't think that that hope is misplaced, is because especially if you've gone to school in the West, you're literally taught that these institutions are there to defend people. So why would you think otherwise? But unfortunately, what the last year has shown us, or reaffirmed really, because I guess you could technically already know this if you look at the Iraq War and plenty of other examples from before, is that these institutions are just there to defend Western hegemony, and they're there to defend the West's interests. And when they go against their interests, they're not going to stop a genocide. Even a genocide, what they're there, the main thing that they're there to stop, supposedly, they're not going to stop it.
And I'd also like to add, even though I think I said previously that it's highlighted how powerless we are, that doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility.
Yeah, good point.
Because we have a massive responsibility,
Especially
especially Muslims in the West, because we have, when, like, alhamdulillah, we're not in a state of poverty, we're not in a state where we are literally being bombed and we have to be in survival mode, which even, by the way, people of Gaza, they're in survival mode and they're still teaching the entire world about, I've learned so much from them, and they're documenting their own genocide and raising awareness about their own genocide whilst also surviving a genocide, which is just insane. On so many levels, it's insane. And if they can do that, then what about us? If they are able to, if they are able to fulfill that responsibility of speaking the truth and speaking up against the oppressors in their situation,
their lives are literally on the line, and they're still putting everything in. They don't care about what the repercussions could be. They know they could die in an instant, but they're still kind of taking that leap. And it kind of makes me think that we are severely lacking, because would we have the kind of same strength and faith if we were in the same situation? Obviously we're living in such comfort over here, we've got everything handed to us. We've got food, we've got shelter, we've got like a warm, it's winter right now, but we've got heating we can turn on in an instant. But if we were faced with that same situation, would we actually have the faith to actually renounce what's going on?
Yeah, it's a really scary thought. It's a really scary thought.
One thing which obviously is very apparent now is it kind of just also comes down to racism. Like, these people can see people of colour, Muslims suffering, and they won't bat an eyelid. But as soon as you see something like that happening to someone white or someone kind of Caucasian, then there's an uproar. It's an outrage. Like, let's look at what's happening in Ukraine and how many people came together, raised money. Like, even in my university, there's still kind of campaigns to kind of stop ties with Russia, that sort of thing, and kind of limit Russia because they're doing this to Ukraine. But when you see the exact same thing mirrored in Palestine and how Israel is treating the Palestinians, they don't care, simply because it's not a white person. I think that's also what it comes down to.
I think the last year has also just exposed hardcore racism. You know, good old-fashioned racism has really come out, and I feel like that's another thing that they try to hide, and they try to say that they're the enlightened West, and, you know, we don't care about race, we accept everyone. And then it comes down to it, and they're willing to see 20,000 children just slaughtered, and they won't do anything to stop it because they don't care about those children, because they never cared about those children, because those children stand in the way of the resources, they stand in the way of the oil, they stand in the way of the trade routes, and that's all that it's about. And it's difficult to confront that as well when you're taught that these institutions are there to protect people. So not just the ICJ and ICC, but even the UN was created by the West. The UN is the institution that partitioned Palestine to begin with, without asking the Palestinians. Do we really expect this institution to to liberate Palestine or to stop the suffering of the Palestinians?
Well, I think Palestine, seeing the oppression happening in Palestine has really opened up so many people's eyes to the other oppression, to the oppression that is taking place in other areas of the world. And there is oppression taking place in other areas of the world. And I do think when it comes to activism, sometimes there may be a tendency, and it may feel really overwhelming because there are so many different issues and problems that people are facing all over the world. And it feels like sometimes so overwhelming, like I can't free all of them. Yeah. And sometimes it might feel like I need to maybe just pick one cause and just stick with that. And I do think that this kind of understanding and perception is a product of the way in which we as an ummah have been divided into nation states. So we understand so we understand the oppression our ummah is facing as something that is specific to certain regions in which it is happening. So like in Kashmir, in Palestine, in Yemen, in Congo, for example, we see the oppression as specific to those areas. Yeah. And obviously there are different things happening in terms of different ways in which they are being oppressed slightly. So maybe not so different in other ways. And how I think it's a symptom of this. It's a symptom of our divisions, and actually I think it's important to also zoom out and think about how I think it's important to also zoom out and think about how they are all symptoms of one big problem that we are facing, which is that we don't have a shield as an ummah. We're unable to actually action Islam, which is to defend the oppressed and to stand up for injustice. We're unable to really action that. Why is it that we are unable to action that? What are the barriers in place that is stopping that?
And I think as well, because we're discussing Gaza, I don't think we can now discuss Gaza without mentioning South Lebanon. And for their stance, they're essentially now facing their own Gaza-like scenario. And I follow a lot of like South Lebanese people on Instagram who live in London, and like the people in Gaza, they're losing people every day, but they still have that thing of like, yeah, but it's for Gaza, and we know we can't do much with the limited resources we have. We know we can't necessarily liberate Palestine, but I think it's a step in the right direction that there are people that are looking beyond and saying, yeah, I might not be Palestinian, I might not be even Arab, like Turks are not Arab, and there's always been this whole thing about Turks versus Arab, but then you see now Turkish people jumping on ships to prevent Arab children from being killed. So I do think there's a lot of hope out there as well.
One of the biggest things I've learned from the people of Gaza is how powerful the Quran is, because their connection to the Quran has really allowed them to go through what they've gone through. The way in which they quote ayahs of Quran to help them the way in which they quote ayahs of Quran to understand the situation that they are in, to understand the situation that they are in and to comfort themselves, and also to use it as a way to recognize their responsibility in the face of the oppressor. Because I mean, let's be real, none of them have given up. None of them have said, actually, let's just leave. Let's actually just go. Like obviously a lot of them, they don't have the choice to leave, but they haven't given up. And I think what has really contributed to that unbreakable spirit is their connection to the Quran, because through that they are able to be constantly grounded in their purpose in this life, and constantly grounded in how they're going to be shaheed. If they're killed, they're shaheed, and that is the highest rank and the highest status in Islam. And I think it really shows how powerful the Quran is, and how if we as Muslims in the West are able to hold on to that the way in which they hold on to it, we can also achieve so much. And we should be referring to that in every aspect, because Gaza has really shown how that can uplift a people, how that can strengthen them, how much resilience that has given them. And it's just really inspiring, something really inspiring.
They kind of understand that this world is just a stepping stone into the hereafter. They know that it's temporary, and it's just a test, and they pass the test, and they will have Jannah, inshallah. And that's kind of what we need to think. We need to think about the fact that this life is temporary. And if we are enjoying this life and we're in comfort, then that is our test. And we should be thinking that I can't get used to this comfort. I shouldn't be happy. I shouldn't be happy in my home and nice and warm. There should be a sort of struggle. Otherwise, this dunya isn't what I'm not making the most of this dunya. I'm not actually kind of working forward to pass my test the way these people are.
No, I like that point of the test, because I think we look at the people of Gaza and we think, wow, what a test. And obviously it's probably one of the biggest tests anyone can go through, what they're going through. But in a similar way, we're going through a test right now. And the way that it's being judged is how are we reacting to this? We're being tested. How are we reacting to seeing our brothers and sisters being slaughtered every day? Are we going to be paralyzed into like, I can't do anything? Are we going to start to become defeatist? Are we going to say, I need to look away, I can't do anything about this? Or are we going to let this spur us into action? And I feel like in Islam, we do have this thing where we believe in tests and we believe that everything happens for a reason, and we know that we're not here forever, and we know that life has a bigger purpose. So you do have to look at where you stand in this, and you can't just look at the people of Gaza and think that's their test. Oh my God, what strong people.
Yeah.
They're so resilient, they're so brave, wow, Because sometimes I feel like that can make you a bit like, it can make you feel like that's your job done, because you feel like, okay, I can't be as great as them, like they've really internalized the Quran, wow, let's just leave it there. No, how are you going to now, after seeing what they are going through, how are you going to let that change your life and spur you into action so that you can help them?
Their actual action.
Yeah, exactly. You can't look at them and be like, and I feel like people tend to do this sometimes, maybe to absolve them of their own responsibility, is, oh look, the people of Gaza are so brave, they're still praying. That obviously they're going to still be praying the salah, like they're going through something and their death is around the corner all the time for them. Of course they're going to still be praying, and of course they're going to constantly be those people that are contemplating death because it's all around them. But how are we going to respond to that? Are we going to, switch off our phones and pretend like it's not going on because they'll be fine because they're so strong and they're going to be shuhada? And of course, being a shaheed is the highest honor in Islam, but those of us who don't have that honor still have to work towards something.
Yeah.
What is our place in this? What is our role? What are we going to answer on the Day of Judgment when the shuhada are there and they're going straight to paradise because they gave their life for this cause? What am I going to give? What am I going to give for this cause? What am I giving for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What am I giving for my brothers and sisters? What have I given? And it can feel really like paralyzing living here and not being able to do anything. And that's why it's important to channel your energy and channel everything to the higher cause, which is essentially Allah is at the forefront of everything. And with that comes the liberation of our people. And it's important not to separate the two things and think that's their struggle and I have a different struggle here in the West, which is like, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? No, actually, their struggle is our struggle. We're just in different areas.
Yeah.
They, have the opportunity to be honoured with shahada, but we still want to be honoured with something. We want to be part of this liberation struggle, and I think that's a really important point to try and remember.
Yeah, absolutely. That approach is so passive, and actually it's not from Islam.
Yeah.
And I think people like to make it out like this approach is from Islam by saying we're going to make dua for them and we're going to give charity to them, which, by the way, Gaza is under siege, so I'm not sure how much your aid is, the aid isn't even getting through, and also the people of Gaza are making dua for themselves, and the dua of the oppressed is always answered. So I'm not saying those things aren't important for us to do, because they are very important for us to do. I'm saying that everything that we can do within our capability, we should be doing, and that doesn't just mean limiting ourselves to specific things, and how that passive approach in just marveling at the people of Gaza, being like, wow, you guys are amazing. You know what? I'll leave you guys to be amazing, and I'm just going to carry on with my life and my comfort little bubble that I've created for myself as a Muslim in the West, because that attitude is actually not from Islam. Even if that comfort bubble is you also going to the masjid and also giving charity and going for Jummah Salah and wearing your hijab, those things are all part of Islam, but Islam is also so much more than that. So you can't limit it or restrict it or secularize it in that respect, because that's not just what Islam is. And when we limit ourselves like that, we do limit the path to change. And I think that's a really important point to reflect upon and think about.
I would say that as Muslims, like the fundamental part of Islam is to understand that Allah is always listening to us. Allah has our back. This sounds really funny, but Allah has our back.
Yeah.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has our back. So in any situation, we have the resources to change our own situation.
Exactly.
If you want to talk about something personal, like something on your spiritual level, say you're not, you really want something really badly, you want a job, you wake up in the middle of the night and you pray tahajjud. That's your solution for that. Make dua. You're struggling to stay away from something, so a solution is fast.
Yeah.
So there's our solutions. But do you seriously think there's no solution in Islam for a literal genocide?
Exactly.
Like, do you seriously think that Allah has not set any kind of way, has not given us any kind of guidance, any kinds of tools to deal with what is happening right now? Not just in Palestine, in Sudan, in Iraq before, but in Syria right now, in Lebanon. Do you seriously think Allah would just like leave us to like fend for ourselves?
Yeah.
Yes, the Prophet ﷺ is no longer with us, but does that mean that we're just like flailing in this world?
Yeah.
Like we just have no one to guide us. People think that Islam is like just something spiritual. It's just just something that you almost not. I wouldn't say go as far as to say it just inside your house, because we wear hijab and that's outside and all those things. But just something that's personal to you and your family.
Yeah.
But no, it doesn't work like that.
It's very individualistic, actually. You're not actually thinking about your Muslim brothers and sisters around the world. And a lot of people also think that I'm going to separate Islam from politics. Politics is something dirty, and I'm going to stay away from it. That's not my job. Especially as a Muslim woman, that's the men's job. Like, that's not something I should be. What I should be doing is at home doing my 5 salahs, fasting Ramadan, trying to increase my iman. But actually, Allah will actually hold us accountable for being complacent. We actually have to realize that we have a role in understanding the relationship of Islam and politics, and looking to history and seeing how Islam has dealt with certain conflicts and things like that. Because like you said, Islam has an answer to everything. If you look to the Quran and the Sunnah, you will find answers to literally every single question or every single difficulty that you have. So I think that's just what we need to do.
There's this quote that really stuck with me. This Persian scholar said, I want to ask God why there is so much suffering, but I'm afraid he'll ask me the same question. Allah has given us all the resources on this earth for everyone to live peacefully, to live happily, to live not struggling for money, not struggling for food, not struggling in wartime and literally losing their family members and losing their children. Allah has given us these resources, and when I say resources, I don't mean there's enough food, there's enough money on this planet for us. He's given us guidelines. He's given us systems.
So I was going to go back to what we were saying about how people look at the people of Gaza and they're like sort of marveling at them. And I've seen a lot of speakers and maybe people in conversations as well speak about the people of Gaza and about how their faith and their commitment to the Quran has inspired Muslims around the world to implement more of Islam in their life, right? And then it goes back to the issue of like how people make Islam personal to them. So what they've taken from the people of Gaza is that, you need to implement Islam in your life, and you need to improve your relationship with the Quran, or you need to pray your prayers. And then you have speakers highlighting this aspect of the genocide in Gaza, about how we can take these aspects from the people of Gaza and we can implement it into our life, and then it ends there. Like, we're just going to implement it in our life now. So you're telling me you're going to take something from the people of Gaza, you're going to take inspiration from them, you're going to admit that they've given you something throughout all of this, they've inspired you, but you're not going to give anything back to them. And I just find that, I don't know what it is, but I just find that really I find it a really horrible point to make. And I've seen a lot of people over the last year, well, they'll discuss Gaza and Islam, and they'll discuss Gaza and our faith, and Gaza and patience. But then it ends there.
It's almost like it's a half point. They just
like
a semicircle.
Like,
you didn't come back round.
Yeah, like Gaza's gonna teach you how to be patient, but then you're not gonna give anything back to Gaza. You're not gonna fight for them. You're not gonna fight for their liberation. That's it. They're gonna teach you how to implement the Quran in your personal life. They're going to teach you how to keep up with your salah, but then you're not going to give anything back to them. You're going to gain from them, but you're not going to give anything back.
It's
and
so
I just
passive.
find it so, I think passive is the word. I think I'm not going to comment on their intention because we can't do that, but I just feel like you say, it's a point left half completed.
I would say there's also a very defeatist kind of understanding to everything. I think there's a lot of Muslims that do know that there is something for us. There is something that we could implement. There is a solution. But what they don't seem to kind of understand is how we're going to get there. They just think that Allah's just going to give it to us.
I wanted to make the point about how even though the situation might make us feel powerless or might make it seem like we are powerless, that doesn't mean that change isn't actually going to happen. And that doesn't mean that change isn't possible. And I think it's a really important point to emphasize, because when we are protesting, I do think I've kind of seen this whole narrative with some people where it's like, we're protesting and we're doing our bit, but who knows what it is that we can actually achieve. But I guess thinking about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised us victory, as an ummah we are promised victory, and Palestine is promised victory. I mean they are going to be victorious one day. Like, that's a fact. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised that to us. But it's about thinking about, what is my part to play in that victory? What is it that I can do to contribute to that?
I find that a lot of Muslims do know what the solution is. They do know that we have something, that we have a system, that we have, that we had something that we lost. But they don't seem to understand that, A, this is the solution to our current day problems, and B, that this is something that we have to work towards. It isn't something that we can just, like, people think that if you just pray all your salahs on time, or we all make dua and we all like change our inner iman, then this greater thing was going to happen.
Like, it's just gonna...
Yeah, but it's not like that. It's like the Muslims in Gaza are praying for a solution. What if we are supposed to be that answered dua?
Yeah.
And we're not moving, we're not doing anything. We're just sitting there working on our inner self, but you're missing the point.
And I feel like if you look at Islam, something that comes up a lot is the issue of rights, and it's the issue of like the rights that one person has over another. So for example, the rights that parents have over their children and children have over their parents, and the rights that your neighbours have over you and you have over your neighbours, and the rights that the earth has. And one of the big rights is the rights that the Muslims have over each other. And if you're not fulfilling those rights, you are accountable. This isn't some land far away that you don't have anything to do with. You are going to be accountable if you don't not fulfilling someone's rights in Islam is such a big deal, like the rights of the orphans, the rights of the needy. If you are found to be lacking on this issue, if you do not fulfill the rights of the Muslims, they can account you on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and that's a scary thought. And it goes back to that issue of accounting yourself, or what have I done for these people in the position that I'm in. Defeatism sometimes creeps in and makes you feel like, well, what can I do? I'm just one person. But I mean, are we really just one person?
We're actually 2.5 billion people.
Yeah, exactly. And this goes directly back to the system that we were talking about before, which is capitalism, which believes in the opposite of that. Yeah. So our beliefs are in direct contrast to the beliefs of capitalism, which is based on individualism. It's based on you getting ahead and you becoming rich and powerful, and not focusing on what you can do for other people. It's about getting ahead for yourself.
I would say that it's more than just us living under this. We've come to a situation where it's not just that we're living under it, it's crept into us. We've internalized it. We've internalized this concept of we live in this system and these are our values when we're as people, citizens of this country, but then we're also Muslims, and they tried to combine it. But no, you're not. Islam is there's a part of Islam that completely contradicts this, and you need to stop downgrading Islam to something that's just something spiritual. Like, it doesn't work like that.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that it's not easy. It's definitely not an easy process, especially being here in the West. It's very easy to be wrapped up in our own lives and not want to look beyond that. And again, as we've mentioned previously, addressing uncomfortable situations and going through that whole process of decolonizing our understanding. It's not an easy thing, and it's actually a constant thing. And I myself am constantly trying to unroot these ideas that have been implanted into my head, which are actually not Islamic ideas. They're actually Western ideas. And it's actually a constant process. And even though we know these ideas exist and we know they're un-Islamic, we know they're wrong, they can still influence us. And actually, it's for me, it's a constant process of checking my thoughts and thinking, why is it that I think that? Actually, where is that thought even coming from? What is the roots of me actually thinking that? And it's just this constant process, which is really actually quite difficult. It's not easy. And that is actually a symptom of our situation today, whereas Muslims, even though we are 2.5 billion, we are still very much under Western hegemony. We're living under a system which is a capitalist system, which is not an Islamic system. And that is unfortunately, these are one of the symptoms in which we face. These are the symptoms which we face as a product of the situation and reality we are in. And we have to address that. We have to work to address that within ourselves. It's not easy. It's actually very difficult. And it's quite upsetting, actually, because there are people who are in positions of power, positions of knowledge and influence. And they should be helping us in doing that. But I think sometimes it feels like they're not helping us in doing that. Or sometimes I'll feel quite disappointed Sometimes I'll feel quite disappointed in the perspective and outlook that is sometimes promoted when it comes to thinking about our role as Muslims on a global scale and how we can actually contribute to creating a tangible change and not just this whole passive approach of I'm going to leave it up to Allah. I'm going to make dua and give charity, which is amazing, or I'm going to boycott, but then I'm going to leave it up to Allah. When actually the entire thought process that has been triggered the past year and a lot of people is actually we are facing a systemic issue right now. There is oppression that is happening on a systemic level, and therefore the solution can only be a change on a systemic level.
Yeah. We've spoken a lot about systems and systemic change, and it feels like over the last few decades there's been a concerted effort to commodify Islam, like with other religions, and part of that has been the emergence of people with almost celebrity status essentially taking on that role of knowledge giver. So they give knowledge to people and they spread Islam, and they're very influential. They have loads of followers on Instagram, and people look to these people for guidance and inspiration. And I just feel like Gaza has shown over the last year that these people are a bit absent where it matters, or maybe there is some fear with regards to addressing this issue. But the people of knowledge, who are essentially now the people of influence, do have a duty to use that knowledge and influence and the status that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them to address the issues that the ummah is facing and to provide people with genuine solutions on how we can essentially liberate the people of Palestine.
I think what this situation and this genocide in Gaza has actually taught me is that I should have a sort of fearlessness in my actions. What I mean by that is I'm viewing these little children who are faced with death and destruction all around them. They're having family members killed right in front of their eyes, yet they're still playing and they're laughing and they're happy and they're finding the joy in little things and just saying Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel, and that's it. That's how they deal with the situation. It makes me feel like if this little child can have that much faith in Allah, and if this child can have that much faith in Allah, then I can actually do so much. I shouldn't be placing any of these little kind of limitations on myself and saying I can't really do this. When I look at the faith and the kind of integrity of these people in Gaza, it kind of inspires me and it makes me feel like I can actually do anything. I shouldn't set any barriers for myself, because that's not emulating what my brothers and sisters in Gaza are doing or how they're feeling.
I really like that. I think it taught me the kind of person I was before and what my priorities were.
Yeah.
How not in line they were with why I've been put on this earth. Like the things I had interests in. And still those things come back you know, because it's been a year and a month, and after a while you get a bit desensitized. But when my dad, he calls me and tells me, oh, someone's passed away in Gaza, and then the phone call will end, and then I'll see what I was looking at on my phone like a minute before, and I was like, what was I doing 10 minutes ago? Like shopping, like who was I 10 minutes ago? I just think that it's a reminder, and I feel guilty saying it, like what you said before about how we have to take things, we need to give something back to them.
Mm-hmm.
But what I take from them is that they are a constant reminder that, this is going to sound like a bit morbid, but our life here is so short, and so our life here is so short and so meaningless, the things that we think we care about. There's only one thing that we need to be caring about, that Allah and Islam, and also fulfilling our duty to our ummah.
I think what Gaza has taught me about myself is similar to what I guess you said about not really understanding my priorities beforehand. Like, I wouldn't say it was terrible, but like I was someone that I could get quite anxious a lot, but now when I look back, I can't even remember what I was anxious about or what I was worried about. And I feel like it's definitely put everything into perspective. And it's also taught me that my well-being is connected to the well-being of my brothers and sisters in a way that I guess I might have thought about before occasionally, but I didn't think about it as deeply as that. Like, I'm happy when they're happy and I'm sad when they're sad. And almost every day for the last, or maybe even every day for the last year and a month, I've thought about them. And if something bad is happening to them, I feel upset about it.
Definitely.
And I feel like there's a reason for that, and I'm still trying to understand it myself, but I feel like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts that in us because that's the way it's supposed to be. Sometimes I feel like I care too much, or sometimes I'll have that moment when I'm like, I'm too invested in this, but then I remember, no, like this is how it's supposed to be. You're supposed to care for these people. You're supposed to worry about them. You're supposed to think about them before you go to sleep, and think about them when you wake up in the morning. And I think this last year has taught me just how important that is for me, and that I can't be truly happy when I know our people are suffering in the way that they're suffering. And Allah's put that in us for a reason, and it's not a bad thing. It's not like, I feel like some people say like, just don't look at your phone, you know, it's upsetting you, but it's not making me feel ill, or it's not making me weaker by keeping up with what's going on. I'm strengthened by it. Like, it upsets me and it's very emotional and I cry and I'm sad, but I'm strengthened at the same time because that's how it's supposed to be. You're supposed to be connected to these people. You're supposed to want what you want for yourself, you're supposed to want for them. And I want them to be liberated, and I'm not going to be fully happy until they are. Yeah. And I think I didn't know I had that in me before. I don't think I really pondered on that as much before this recent genocide began.
I would say the same thing about priorities. For me, it wasn't that I was an anxious person, and I'm wondering, like, why did I used to get anxious when they're facing these things, like what you said before. How, for me, it was more about my priorities in terms of my likes and my dislikes. What dominated my time? Obviously, I prayed, and obviously I made dua and all these things, but it was such a me, myself, and I kind of type of Islam. Like, I'm gonna make dua. I'm gonna wake up for tahajjud to make dua so that I can get this or get that, or I'm gonna make a whole list of my du'as I'm gonna read every single night, and I'm gonna do my dhikr. My personal connection with Allah.
Yeah.
But your personal connection with Allah and your connection with your ummah and your relationship with your ummah are tied together.
Exactly.
You cannot push one aside. And we know this. Even if we don't talk about the solution and us, what we need to be doing on a serious level of actually going to fight and help them, because we can't expect an oppressed people to free themselves from an occupation. It has to be us doing it. It has to be us helping us. It's definitely something that's in us as an ummah, because why else would we be filling the streets? Why else would every single Friday they were having marches in Jordan and Egypt, and I remember they were calling upon the people in Egypt. They were chanting, "Tell the people in Amman that we are also awake."
Yeah.
Like there's a connection there. We can't deny it, even if we've forgotten a certain thing that we need to be working towards. I don't think I would ever say that this ummah is lacking in that connection. They just need to repurpose it. We just need to be redirected in where we're putting our efforts. We've never been an ummah who doesn't care about each other. We've never stopped loving each other. We've never stopped being compassionate for each other. We need to direct it in the right way. It needs to be less about us and our connection with Allah, and like say even making dua for them. Like obviously that's something that we need to be doing, but our connection with Allah is dependent on us doing something. It's an action.
It can also be our connection with Allah.
Yeah, it can. It has to be both.
Yeah.
It has to be both. Allah's going to ask us at the end of the day. Allah is going to ask us on the Day of Judgment, what did you do for your people that were suffering? Of course it's just as much as He's going to ask us about our salah, and He's going to ask us if we prayed or if we fasted or if we did our fard. He's also going to ask us about our ummah. Like, it is just as important. You need to stop making Islam into something that is, I don't want to say selfish, but something that your Islam belongs to you.
Yeah.
No, your Islam,
my Islam,
needs to go out into the world. It needs to become something.
One thing I've learned about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over the last year is that Allah is the best of planners, and as the Quran ayah says, Wallahu ghalibun ala amri. And I feel like what this ayah means to me is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually makes it so easy for us to distinguish between good and evil. Like, it's very easy. The lines are not blurred at all, meaning that we don't really have an excuse when it comes to situations like this. It's so easy to see who the oppressors are and who the oppressed are. And it's so easy to see where victory will come from and where victory will not come from. So, for example, if anyone was under the illusion that victory might come from participating within a system of oppression, I feel like that illusion's gone because it just hasn't happened. And it kind of reminds me of a really good point I heard once with regards to Surah Lahab in the Quran, and how technically if Abu Lahab had just accepted Islam, because the Quran said he's going to one place without a doubt, and the Quran is the truth, right? And if he had even publicly just accepted Islam or had, renounced falsehood, he could have potentially created a lot of doubt amongst the Muslims about the truthfulness of the Quran, because the Quran said he is going to Jahannam. If he had turned around and said, actually, I'm going to become a Muslim now, I'm going to accept the Prophet Muhammad, people could have turned around and said, this is confusing, there's confusion. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't allow that to happen. He died on falsehood. And I feel like you can draw a direct comparison between the systems of falsehood that we have now, in that, for example, if you were under any, and these illusions aren't misplaced, like they come from a good place, but if you believe that participating in a specific system is going to bring victory and it hasn't worked, don't be disheartened by that. Everything's just going to plan. The victory will not come from falsehood, and that's why it hasn't brought us victory. That's why it hasn't alleviated the suffering of our people, because it's not supposed to alleviate the suffering of our people. The United States of America is not supposed to liberate our people because the system that they govern under is false. And say they did liberate us, would that not be confusing for us? Would it not be confusing that the system that has created so much oppression over the world suddenly switched one day? Would that not leave the Muslims in a state of confusion? And I think that that's one thing that this last year has taught me, that even though it can be so disheartening when the powers that be are not moving to make change, it's because they're not supposed to. It's because they haven't renounced falsehood. They're not going to do something good and make it confusing for us. Allah's not going to confuse us like that. And I think that's something that I've definitely been taught over the last year.
We started this conversation talking about Gaza 1 year on, and I guess a question to think about is how or what is it that we should do to prevent us being back here 1 year later talking about the same issue?
I think in terms of it being 1 year later, obviously none of us can see into the future, and the way things that have been developing over the last few months, I think the entire issue has been getting bigger rather than smaller. For example, it's spread to Lebanon, and it's difficult to say where we'll be in a year. But in terms of what I hope to see or what I pray for example, I think one of the prayers that I make a lot, one of the dua that I make a lot, is that Allah awakens the hearts of this ummah, and that the people in positions that are able to do something take that step and they do it. The men of this ummah, for example, I often pray, Ya Allah, please awaken the hearts of the men of this ummah to take action to save their brothers and sisters in Gaza. And that's all it takes, and we need to work towards that, and I just hope that we see that day soon, inshallah.
Yeah. And something that I think about and make dua for is, oh Allah, please continue to use me for this cause, because I think like never, I think I'm thinking more in terms of never take our deen for granted, and Ya Allah, please keep us as an ummah steadfast on our deen, because ultimately that is what is going to grant us victory. And even how you said about awakening the hearts of the ummah, I do think in a way the hearts of the ummah has been awakened, and that's happened in the past year. I mean, I don't doubt the sincerity of the Muslims globally, and I don't doubt the fact that we are all bleeding for Palestine in our hearts. We are all so deeply devastated by what is happening. It's just about that
Putting it to action.
Taking it further. It's just about now taking it further. What is it that we have to do to take that further to actually see a free Palestine? Because that responsibility ultimately lies with us as the wider ummah.
I think something I make dua for is that Allah redirects this ummah towards the right solutions, as in let us stop fixating on things that are futile, and let us actually stop putting our efforts into the real permanent solution, and let us make the connection between our spiritual Islam and Islam as something that can transcend our inner lives and manifest in the systems that we live under.
I feel like 1 year on, we are already starting to see a form of weakness. So if we look at like Israel and their economy and their standards and their living there, it is starting to weaken. So the efforts that the Ummah have been putting in, it's not like we're kind of bang your head against a stone and nothing's going anywhere.
Exactly.
There is some sort of progress. It's just that something needs to give, something needs to happen. Our efforts need to be redirected. Our efforts are there, they just need to be directed in one kind of way, and there needs to be one kind of push for us to actually kind of band together. That's also one of my duas, like we need something to come and unite us and help us to go and actually save our brothers and sisters. Like that is our main goal. I think something has to give, it inshallah, so that we're not sat here a year on, it will give.
And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala count us amongst those people that was working towards that and working towards the liberation of Palestine in accordance with the Quran and Sunnah, in accordance with his guidance, and may he accept it from us.
Ameen.
Ameen.